The Labour Party performed terribly in the 2023 New Zealand election. The Labour Party was the only party that lost seats in the 2023 election, and it lost a lot of seats. Throughout the country, many Labour safe seats fell. Many high-ranking Labour Party politicians were kicked out of Parliament. And this is not surprising. The Labour Party's 2023 election campaign was pathetic. Labour's pathetic campaign was not the only cause of their defeat. Global issues from the COVID pandemic to the Ukraine war had created difficult economic conditions that would hinder the re-election efforts of even the most competent government. It is also true that numerous bad decisions and an appalling lack of ministerial discipline contributed substantially to Labour's defeat. But Labour had an opportunity to minimise the electoral damage done by these things. And that opportunity was their election campaign. And they failed to make use of this opportunity. Their election campaign was embarrassing. They failed to strongly defend their record. They failed to offer a positive vision for the future of New Zealand. They failed to provide any serious reason as to why they should be re-elected. They failed to offer adequate criticism of their opponents. They failed to distance themselves from the insanity of the Maori Party. Hipkins gave a mediocre performance in the debates, and they offered the country garbage policies. One of their flagship policies was GST or fruit and vegetables. What a joke. A minuscule tax cut that would be exploited by the supermarkets to increase their profits while giving consumers nothing. Laughable, utterly laughable. Particularly when contrasted with National's promise to deliver a major tax cut by introducing a long overdue adjustment to tax brackets. Labour should have had stronger policies. The policies Labour could have campaigned on are endless. A tax-free threshold, a 4-day working week, universal basic income, fully funded doctors' appointments, free public transport, a living wage. Great policies funded by a capital gains tax, wealth tax, land tax, or inheritance tax. A great thing for the many, paid for by the wealthy few. There are countless strong policies that Labour could have adopted, but instead they opted for a pathetic tax cut that would probably amount to nothing more than supermarket profit. Embarrassing. Their policies also made the conversation focus on taxation, and National was strongest on that issue. Idiotic. They did campaign on limited free dental care. This was a decent policy, although it had some issues. For one, it only applied to younger people, who were less likely to vote, and who are more likely to vote for the left if they did vote. So it was of very limited value for winning over older swing voters that Labour would need to win. It is also true that most people were sceptical of such proposals. Healthcare, education, policing. The government fails to properly fund and deliver the services that it does already provide. Introducing even more services could stretch funding even thinner. Hipkins was a weak leader who had no interest in bold policy. There are countless bold policies that Labour could campaign on. Popular policies that people would vote for. A tax-free threshold. Australia and Britain have one, we should have one too. Most people like the idea of a tax-free threshold. The political right likes it because they like tax cuts. The political left likes it because they empathise with the interests of low-income people. So why the hell did Labour not campaign on this policy? I know some people within Labour do support this policy, but ultimately these bold reformers were outnumbered by moderate Liberals who have no interest in actually standing for anything. Moderate Liberals who think offering nothing and refusing to stand for anything is the best way of winning an election. And oh how wrong they are. Some Labour Party people seem to think that Labour's path to victory is being a centrist party that stands for nothing and exists only to win elections and deliver mediocre governance. We already have a party that serves this purpose, the National Party, and you will never beat them at their own game. If people have to choose between the real National Party and the imitation National Party, they will choose the real National Party every time. and in the 2023 election, that is exactly what they did. The Labour Party's 2023 election campaign was laughable. Hipkins was weak throughout the campaign. His best speech of the election cycle by far was his election defeat speech. Labour failed to defend their record and highlight their numerous achievements. This left the voter feeling like they had no reason to vote for Labour. The Labour Party's 2023 policy platform was hideous. GST or fruit and veg as a flagship policy. What a joke! What about a tax-free threshold? What about an inquiry into a 4-day working week? What about more trade union empowerment or encouragement of worker-owned and controlled businesses? What about actual pro-worker policy? Free public transport, fully funded doctor's appointments, a living wage. There are endless, simple, common-sense progressive policies. They are not hard to come by, they are not hard to justify, and if you're willing to tax the wealthy, they are not hard to fund. With good policies, Labour could have won, and at worst they would have lost while fighting for something. Nothing is more embarrassing than selling your values to win, and then losing anyway. Then you have nothing left, and that is what Labour did. They abandoned their legacy as a party of bold reformers in a desperate attempt to win an election. And then they lost anyway. Because you cannot beat National at their own game. We do not need another party of moderate, career politicians and aspiring centrists who have no values and will say and do anything to get into government. Hipkins provided weak and uninspiring leadership. Hipkins failed to offer a compelling vision of a better New Zealand. Labour lacked a strong, simple argument. A strong, simple argument is what you need if you want to win. Labour failed to sufficiently brag about their many achievements. Labour failed to aggressively defend their at times impressive record. The one exception to this was Grant Robertson, who provided an excellent defence of the government's record when debating Nicola Willis. The Labour Party failed to emphasise their pro-worker successes. The empowerment of trade unions, the high minimum wage, the low unemployment rate. Everyone should have known about these things, but for whatever reason, Labour failed to constantly remind people of their many achievements. Labour failed to distance themselves from the more deranged elements on the left. Labour should have distanced themselves from the Maori Party. This would have made them appear like a reasonable choice. This would have dispelled accusations of Labour Party extremism and weakened the anti-co-governance campaign of the right. Labour should have done many things differently. Stronger policy and stronger rhetoric was desperately needed. I will give credit to a few Labour MPs who did manage to hold the line against the blue tide. Grant Robertson performed very well in his debates with Nicola Willis. Grant Robertson did a superb job of defending Labour's record and exposing the idiocy of Nicola Willis. Grant Robertson has been known to favour substantial tax reform. Had Grant Robertson led the Labour Party into the election, I think they would have performed far better. But he was worn out and sick of politics, and after 6 difficult years in government, I cannot blame him. Some Labour members of Parliament managed to hold the line. Rachel Boyack and Greg O'Connor were the only Labour MPs who managed to retain marginal electorates, so they should be given credit for that, particularly since Labour lost many safe seats. It should be noted that many individuals did work hard to push for a Labour victory and good policy, but they were let down by a larger party organisation that had no interest in being bold. A Labour Party that had no interest in taking a stand and fighting for good things. In spite of the efforts of many individuals, the campaign was pathetic. With these few exceptions aside, Labour's 2023 election campaign was pathetic and embarrassing. It is not surprising that they lost. Half the time it felt like they did not even want to win. Half the time it felt like they accepted defeat long before the election. They did not put up much of a struggle. National did not fight an especially great campaign either, and still they secured a victory. But National is still weak and increasingly vulnerable. Labour must come back in 2026 with more fight than ever before. Labour must return with strong rhetoric and strong policies. Labour must dare to be bold. Every time that Labour has been put in opposition, they have spent at least 9 years there. This time we cannot afford to wait that long. Labour must win the 2026 election, and that means learning from the countless mistakes of the 2023 election.